Welcome to PHP Essential Training Series. In this tutorial we're going to talk about what is PHP. And in order to do that, there's a few things that you should know before we dive into PHP. You should have a basic understanding of HTML or HTML5 and again some understanding of CSS. You don't have to be experts in either one of these topics or subjects, but you should have a basic understanding of how they work, because as we go through this Essential Training Series, you're going to be using a lot of HTML and CSS, and you need to understand how that works and how they all work together with PHP. So what is PHP? PHP, or PHP Hypertext Preprocessor, is a widely used open source general purpose scripting language that's very well suited for web development and can be easily embedded in HTML5 or HTML web pages. The ability to embed PHP script inside HTML pages allows us to easily jump in and out of the scripting language as the need arises and gives us an opportunity to do some very interesting things with our HTML pages. PHP is widely accepted general purpose scripting language. It's used quite often in web development. As you're going to see throughout these Essential Training Series, we're going to be using PHP in web development. It can be embedded in HTML and HTML5 web pages. It makes your web content dynamic, so we can actually read web content from a database or from text files or in a variety of different ways to make our content dynamic. It's a server-side language. It runs on the servers, not normally deployed on a local client. In fact, it's never deployed on a local client. It runs on the server. Your client has scripts or code that will actually reach out to the server, request stuff from it based on the PHP scripting, and then it's sent back to the browser as an HTML page. It's easy to learn, it's open source, and there's no cost associated with it. PHP code is easier to learn than most other programming languages. PHP is a scripting language / programming language. It's C-like in its syntax. As a scripting language, PHP does not compile. That's the difference between a scripting language and a programming language. Is a scripting language, there is no compiling of the language itself once it's written. But it's very powerful like a programming language, and PHP gives you the best of both worlds. Because there is a lot of power in PHP, as you're going to see as we work through these tutorial series. There's a lot of things that you can do with PHP that would be very similar to a programming language. It's fast, it's open source like I said earlier, it's stable, and most importantly, it's cross-platform. So what is a PHP file? PHP files can contain HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP code. PHP code is executed on the server and the result is returned to the browser as plain HTML or HTML5. And PHP files must have the extension .php after the file name. And again, we'll demonstrate all of this stuff as we go through the tutorials. I'm just trying to give you an overview of what PHP is. What can PHP do? PHP can generate dynamic page content. PHP can create, open, read, write, and close files on your server. PHP can collect form data, which we'll do a lot of in our demonstrations. PHP can send and receive cookies, which control our sessions in our website. PHP can add, delete, or modify data in a database. This is something else that we're going to demonstrate quite a lot inside this tutorial series. PHP can restrict users to access certain sections of your website by using PHP scripts. We can actually go in and set up certain areas of the website that are restricted only for registered users. PHP can control that, and PHP can also encrypt data. PHP runs on various platforms. PHP can run on Windows, Linux, Unix, the Mac OS, just to name a few. PHP is compatible with almost all servers in use today. PHP supports a wide range of databases. The database that we'll be working with throughout the tutorial series is MySQL, but there are other databases that are supported with PHP, and we'll talk about those when we start talking about the APIs in PHP. PHP is an open source application and it's free. We talked about that a little earlier. And PHP is easy to learn and runs very efficiently on your web server. So let's talk about running PHP. A web server must have the runtime PHP installed in order to process the PHP code. If you've sat through the tutorial series in our tools section and set up your WAMP server, that actually installed that PHP application so that we could do the testing and development. And the PHP runtime is installed on that WAMP server. In most cases, or MAMP server by the way, in most cases the output from a PHP program is in an HTML or HTML5 page. PHP programs are called from a web page and return new web pages based on the results of the PHP code that was executed. And that's what we mean. We actually get this web page going. It's got PHP script in it. As the web page reaches that portion of the page with the script, it sends a request to the server. That PHP script is processed. The server responds back with the new HTML or HTML5 page, and that's displayed in the browser window. Alright, so let's look a little bit more about running PHP. First, we have a web page with a PHP script that's part of that web page, or part of that HTML document. It sends a request to our web server, which is running that PHP runtime. It's installed on that web server and running. The server in turn processes that PHP script or PHP code and sends us back a new web page with the processed and executed PHP code, and that's served back to our browser with the changes that that PHP script or PHP code requested, so that now we've got more than likely dynamic data on that page. One thing I didn't show here that I could have is I could have actually shown the web server going out to a database based on the processing of the script, pulling information from that database, bringing it back to the web server, and then sending it out to that web page in a new web page or new HTML document with that information that was requested from that PHP script. Okay, so let's demonstrate a very simple PHP web page so you can get an idea of what we're going to cover in this essential training series. Alright, so let's go ahead and do a little demonstration of what we were talking about in that little presentation on what exactly PHP is. And if you notice in my text editor, and again, highly recommended that you use a text editor, in the tools section of the tutorial we have some recommendations on some very good text editors for both Windows and the Macintosh. For most of my demonstrations I use Sublime Text 2. It is not a free text editor, but it is very, very powerful, and with a lot of the things that I do and some of the features that are built into this text editor, I find it's very helpful in what I do for development. As you're just learning, you don't need a text editor that's this powerful. I just use it because I'm used to it. Anyway, I have a basic HTML5 document here. And I'm going to leave this on the screen, so if you don't have the exercise files, if you haven't purchased this portion of the tutorial, you can type this out. But you'll notice a basic HTML5 document. I've got my little demonstration text, and inside the body I've got my H3 tag, which talks about exercise 1 demonstration, and then I've got this PHP code inside the opening PHP tag and the closing PHP tag. And in here, basically what I'm doing is I'm just creating an array, and it's an array of different sizes for text, and then I'm setting up an index number based on the seconds of the date. I divide that with a modulus of 5. It's looking for the remainder when it's divided by 5, and that remainder is going to go grab one of these values. So it's going to give me a number between 1 and 5. 0 to 4, I'm sorry, based on the remainder of this. And again, you don't need to understand all of this right now. You're going to learn this as you go through the exercises. But it's going to give me a pointer that's going to point to a position, to a particular position in my array, which is going to grab one of these sizes. It's going to look at the style font size that I've assigned to this print. This is my text, or my test, and it's going to assign that size to the text based on my refreshing that browser window and sending it back to the server and requesting an update from the server from this PHP code. So the first thing I'm going to do, we've got our WAMP servers running. So the WAMP server is up and running. In order to do the demonstration, we've got to have our WAMP server running. I'm saving this file on my dynamic, or in my WAMP server under the www directory. My directory's got another directory in it, but that's because I've got a lot of stuff there, and I'm going to name this exercise _1.php. Notice, like we talked about in the demonstration or in the presentation, that this has a PHP extension because it is actually storing PHP code. So we've got to know how to run that code, and we have to know that this particular window or this particular HTML document has to go out to the web server request PHP information from that web server and have it sent back and processed. Alright, so let's bring up the browser window. I'm going to go ahead and do a refresh on this browser window, and you'll notice this is exercise 1 demonstration. That's where our heading's coming from. My first refresh brought back very large text. If I refresh it again, notice my text dropped down, and every time I refresh this, I should get, based on where I'm at in the array, a different size text. Again, randomly, but based on where my index is in the array, where this pointer is pointing at inside my size array, because that's what I actually created here. I created a variable called size, I made it an array, and I put these 5 different values in it. Again, these are CSS values for my font size and styling. This array is something you're going to learn a lot about as we go through the Essentials training course in PHP. We use arrays quite often, but again, fast demonstration to let you know this stuff is updated by the server as the code is processed. Each time I refresh this browser window or ask for an update from the server, it's going to send me back something based on the size that it's at in the pointer. If I go here and look at view source, you're going to notice that this particular update, it gave me a font size of 2M. You'll notice that dynamically it went up here. It must be in position 3 because it's 0 based. Arrays are all 0 based. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's grabbed the 2M size for our font size and displayed that in our browser window. If we update this again, and let's come back and view the source again, that font size has changed. And now you'll notice it's 1.5M. So again, we're getting that size dynamically from the server each time we request information for this particular browser window from the WAMP server. And you'll also notice that in our view source, we're not seeing any of that PHP code that's displayed in our development or text editor. All we see is the actual HTML code that's processed from that development. And that's another important thing to remember, is that PHP is secure from the browser window. We don't actually see that in that source. We just see the results of it being processed. So that's just a fast demonstration on what you can do with PHP, a very high level. I mean, there's nothing very advantageous about what we just did, but it just gives you an idea that PHP is processed dynamically from our web server. And as you go through the Essential Training series, you're going to learn more about all the different things that we can do with this processing. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial.